The first episode opens with a vision of the destruction of a city, seemingly at the hands of Alexander. Philip II, king of Macedonia, enters to find his wife Olympias, a snake witch, receiving an oracle during her last month of pregnancy. Philip says he will never forgive her for doing this, because he sees it as an evil incantation. He goes to kill the snake, but loses an eye in the process. Alexander is born at this moment. Olympias laughs at the prospect of her son one day destroying the world. Alexander's friend Philetus searches for him as the king's war council gathers. The kingdom is currently at war with Athens. One of the counselors, Attalos, is particularly critical of Alexander. This will be the young prince's first war, so he should be present at the conference. Attalos even goes so far as to say that due to the prince's absence, and the rumors that he visits his queen mother every night, one might even say that he is acting in contempt of the king's authority. It's clear that Attalos wants to turn the king against his son, although he pretends that he's simply concerned for Alexander. Meanwhile, Alexander is chilling in a pool while listening to his friend Hephaestion play the lyre. He hides underwater as Philetus arrives. An assassin, who had been following Philetus, attacks Hephaestion, mistaking him for Alexander, at which point the prince leaps out of the water and cuts off the assassin's arm with his sword. It then transforms and flies away. Alexander tells Philetus that what Macedonia's army is lacking is speed. Then, he sets off to go obtain this speed. Philetus follows. Turns out, he's going to try and capture the wild man-eating horse, Bucephalus, that has been running wild in the woods and killing men. Meanwhile, the cavalrymen Clitus and Ptolemy are already in the woods trying to defeat the horse, but they are unsuccessful. Alexander intervenes, but he is attacked by 3 more assassins who get the better of the prince, Philetus, and Clitus, by trapping them inside force fields. Just as the assassin is about to kill Alexander, he manages to free himself. And with the help of the horse Bucephalus, he dispatches them all. After which, he successfully tames the wild horse. Ptolemy explains that the assassins were probably the disciples of Pythagoras. One of them momentarily wakes up and says something about a platohedron before dying. Alexander then asks Clitus to join his cavalry. On the battlefield, Attalos seems delighted that Alexander has not shown up to battle. But just then, the prince's cavalry arrives. As the battle is turning in favor of the Athenians, Alexander and his cavalry are able to secure victory by waiting until the last moment to attack. King Philip is annoyed by the soldiers' reverence for the prince. They are calling for him to be crowned king. Later, at dinner, Philip gets angry at Alexander for disobeying his orders during the battle. Afterwards, Attalos offers his daughter Eurydice to the king, saying that he should divorce Olympias. And he continues to drive a wedge between the king and Alexander, even questioning the prince's paternity, suggesting Philip may not even be his actual father. Meanwhile, Aristotle is approached by the disciples of Pythagoras. They ask him where the platohedron is. They believe they must destroy the platohedron first in order to be able to kill Alexander. Aristotle's niece, Cassandra, arrives just in time and kills the assassins. Meanwhile, Alexander is informed that the king of Persia has just been assassinated and Darius III has taken over. He is known as the shining king of the world. Attalos visits Olympias and tells her that she has been banished from the throne for her pagan practices. To which she responds with laughter. Alexander goes to confront his father about divorcing Olympias. He loudly demands that Philip look into his eyes, which unnerves everyone present in the room, and then he just walks away. Pretty great power move. After their defeat, Athenian ambassadors head to Babylon, where they hope to align with new King Darius. Alexander and his friends however sneak in as Athenian slaves, then kill the guards, causing the Persians to think that Athens is betraying them. Alexander also meets a woman named Roxanne. Meanwhile, back in Macedonia, Aristotle encounters what appears to be the ghost of his old master Plato. Plato tells him that he has an idea. But Aristotle does not believe in such things. Plato defies Aristotle to explain his presence using his system of logic. But he cannot. Plato then shows him the platohedron, in which Aristotle perceives Alexander, disguised as a woman, crossing paths with Darius in Babylon. After being captured by guards, Ptolemy is suspended in the air, but Alexander is able to save him from execution at the last minute by releasing all the horses in the city from their stables. Philip's new wife Eurydice gives birth to a son that Philip desires to become king instead of Alexander. Philip holds a great ceremony to present his new prince to the masses and also constructs a huge golden statue of himself, declaring himself a god. During the ceremony, however, the statue crumbles and a guard hypnotized by Olympias assassinates Philip. Following Philip's death, Alexander ascends the throne and Attalus is executed. Athens plots to fight back against Macedonia, doubting Alexander's strength, but relents once Macedonia defeats Thebes in battle. Alexander places severe demands on Athens but relents on most of them after meeting with the philosopher Diogenes of Sinope. Alexander next plots an attack on Persia and starts leading his troops there. Around this time Philotas' father Parmenion reveals to him a secret about Alexander, that prior to his birth Olympias proclaimed that he would destroy the world. In addition, Aristotle sends his niece, Cassandra, to join Alexander's cavalry. Macedonia's forces continue to head through Persia's territories with multiple victories. Along the way Alexander recruits the doctor Philippus to join him after undoing Gordian's knot, which has been said can only be undone by the king. In their next battle with Persia, Macedonia's troops are hopelessly outnumbered by Persia's, but Darius tells his forces to retreat when members of the Pythagorean cult intervene. During the battle Philotas falls off his horse and has a vision of Olympia summoning demons. While in Egypt Alexander meets Dinocrates, a member of his army who tells him of the great city he'd prefer to create there, Alexandria. Alexander has a vision of himself being in Alexandria 100 years after his death. He visits the place where he was entombed by Ptolemy. Before leaving Egypt, Alexander and his men visit the temple of Ammon, where they are told that Alexander will be killed by the one he trusts the most. Ptolemy witnesses a separate prophecy, that he will become great king of the world. Plotting with Persia, Pythagorean cult members make another attempt on Alexander's life, but he is able to fight them off. Darius leads Persia's armies against Macedonia's. Aristotle meanwhile meets with Diogenes, requesting the Platohedron, the device which contains the knowledge of the entire world. Diogenes claims that he tossed it aside. The two watch as the battle continues. The Macedonian army gains new strength when there is an eclipse of the moon, and the Platohedron appears and ascends to the heavens. As the battle nears its conclusion, Alexander kills Darius, defeating the Persians once and for all. With Persia now part of his empire, Alexander recruits Satybarzans, Darius's former advisor. The Macedonian army becomes concerned that Alexander wants to continue heading east rather than return to Macedonia. Philotas dismisses their complaints but doesn't tell Alexander. Aristotle is also concerned with Alexander's actions and tells Cassandra that she will have to kill him should he continue to push eastward. Philippus, secretly a member of the Pythagorean cult, plots with them to kill Alexander during his wedding to Roxanne through the use of a dancer possessing poison. During the battle she poisons Alexander but is killed before finishing him off. Satybarzans frames Parmenion and Philotas for treason. Parmenion is killed by the plotters and Philotas is tied up and stoned to death. When Alexander arrives during the stoning, Philotas requests he let him die so as to not show weakness to the Persians. Philippus, who treats Alexander, has the opportunity to poison Alexander but instead reveals the truth to him and provides Alexander the means to heal himself, then kills himself with the poison intended for Alexander. After executing Satybarzans and the other Persian traitors, Alexander leads his forces towards India. Aristotle provides Cassandra with a parchment that she is instructed to read when they reach India. They reach India where they see a large number of horse-like men known as the Braham priests. Clytus, becoming increasingly suspicious of Alexander, questions his motives. At this moment, the Braham suddenly attack, interrupting them. As Alexander and Clytus fend them off, Cassandra reads the parchment, putting her under a spell from Aristotle to kill Alexander. When she lunges towards him, Clytus steps in the way and takes the fatal wound himself. Alexander and the others continue through India, where they encounter a massive army made up of all the soldiers they have killed over the years. During the battle, Hephaestion is killed when Alexander fights the ghost of Darius. Alexander rides on into a column of light and faces off against King Porus, who takes on Alexander's appearance. Stating that the world tells him to destroy himself, Alexander defeats his doppelganger in combat. He then encounters Pythagoras at the end of the world, but Pythagoras has no interest in stopping Alexander from destroying the world. He echoes Diogenes' words to Alexander that by destroying the world, Alexander will be creating it anew. Alexander seemingly embraces his destiny as destroyer of the world, but the world does not end. Instead, the dark skies clear and Alexander emerges from a pillar of light facing west. He decrees that destiny now points him that way, and embarks for Macedonia. After Alexander and his army return to Macedonia, Aristotle receives a letter from Cassandra informing him that she has chosen to stay with Alexander of her own will. Later, a handmaiden attempts to find Alexander to tell him that Roxanne is pregnant. Elsewhere, Alexander is asked to get out of the light by a child drawing geometric shapes and writing formulas on the ground. Motivated by his own prophecy, Ptolemy attempts to stab Alexander, but Alexander prevents him. He then lets Ptolemy escape, stating that Ptolemy's prophecy is unchanged. Alexander turns back to the child's work, and Cassandra asks what he is looking at. Alexander replies that he is witnessing the world he destroyed being reborn. At this moment, a soldier appears and announces that they are ready to depart for Arabia. As Alexander walks off, it is revealed that the child's name is Euclid, and he pulls out a small version of the Platohedron. This may imply that the destruction of the world was metaphysical in nature, and that the new world of Euclid and Ptolemy has replaced the old world of Aristotle and Plato. The final scene depicts Euclid's Platohedron resting on the ground next to his diagrams, catching the sun's dying rays. This fades into a stark image of Alexander atop his horse, set against the sun and a crimson sky.